did not forget about my GP7 project. Finally getting back to it, just working on some other stuff. So a little refresher. So here's where we were. I'm modeling 1974, which is a year after the chassis system was created. And none of the photos I've seen in any of the documentation reflect, and maybe one was out there somewhere, but show, one of these original GP7s in a, this is the Empire Builder scheme. So what appears to be even the leftover stuff from the 60s that didn't get immediately painted into the chassis was a little bit more like this. So I had previously shown how I had painted the shell and numbered and decaled to more appropriately reflect the type of equipment that might be left over and still being used. And these are both the Athearn Blue Box GP9s, which most of us have figured out by now are actually simply GP7s with dynamic brakes. And that created a little bit of a problem for me because most of the GP7s that B&O had did not have dynamic brakes. My part of the world that I'm modeling was a tractive effort area in western Pennsylvania that really did require dynamic brakes. So what I did is hunt around for photos on the internet. I don't know if this particular C&O GP7 5889 ever served in Pennsylvania. I think mostly it spent its time in Indiana, but I'm not sure. Either way, it'll be a C&O model. It did exist, but it's going to be on my part of the world. So a couple stalls that created the delay in this project. First, again, like I said, I was a kid and I lost a lot of the parts to this. So I had lost the brake cylinders, or air cylinders rather. I had lost the railings, I had lost the headlight lenses, which is why this used to be a powered unit, and I actually swapped all the dummy parts from a GP35 to this, and now the GP35 has the motor, and that's working on my layout, because that was in this style paint already. So now I'm going back and trying to improve my roster's credibility, if you will. And so the first thing I did was I cast some new air tanks, and just a word to the wise, I used the smooth-on silicone rubber, and seems like a very good product. Unfortunately, though, when you buy it on Amazon, this is especially the A side, I don't know where the B side is, somewhere. The A side is very, very moisture and air sensitive and time sensitive, and the batch I got, almost like bubble gum. I was able to get it to work, but I would just suggest if you're going to buy this product, buy it directly from Smooth-On's website. You're much more likely to get a fresh batch of it rather than getting who knows how long it sits at an Amazon store. And of course, me, I happen to be about 20 minutes away from Smooth-On's factory, so I guess if I was smarter, I just would have bought it directly from them and probably driven over and gotten it. So I might do that next time. But I did get it to work. The first two attempts didn't get. Actually, I had to make two molds. The first mold, I just couldn't get the mounting stud to pour. I did get it. Here's my mold. Did get it to work finally, and so you can see the tops of the mounting studs. While I was at it, I decided to add some piping to the ends. I just looked at a GP9 Athearn Genesis series, kind of copied the piping to the extent that I could there. And then with the railings, I originally bought some 0.015 phosphor bronze wire. Ended up using 0.025. That's what the shell already has holes for the steel rails that were supposed to come with it. And the stanchions, I did buy a pack of those at my hobby shop. Just didn't seem to work with 0.015, so I went back to 0.025. I know, too fat, too thick, but this whole body is too wide, as we all know. So in the grand scheme of things, as I've mentioned before, I'm into operations. This guy will definitely haul freight, and it's going to get a decoder. It's going to get a sound decoder. And I know some people might think that why on earth would you put that much money into a very, very low quality, inexpensive model? A couple reasons. One, I've had these since I was a kid, so I'm a little bit attached to them. Two, it's a really good learning experience. I don't know about everybody else, but some of these new locomotives, they are so detailed and they're so delicate. I mean, I'm not the most gentle person in the world, but I swear you look at those kits the wrong way and they break or something falls off, a sunshade, something. And so for those of us who grew up with these Athearns, these babies are indestructible. So there's a little bit of me that wasn't about to try weathering or modifying or just doing anything to a more modern kit or a locomotive, just because they're so delicate. So this is just a learning experience, but these guys are going to both run. Actually, this front one is the first one I put a decoder in. It's got a TCS Wow Sound decoder. Thing runs really, really well. I do have to clean the commutator off occasionally, but you know, works very, very well, very enjoyable. This is going to get the same treatment. Actually, I may buy a CAN motor for that GP35 and then bring the open frame Athearn motor that originally came from this unit back over to here. This unit actually was also a same exact identical, you can't see the number, 740. I did add number boards to this one. So something else I did, one of the other reasons I use phosphor bronze wires, I've found that adding chains works a lot better when you can solder, although I guess you can solder to steel. I just decided to use phosphor bronze wire. The other nice thing about phosphor bronze wire is you can bend it back and forth in the same spot more than once and it doesn't break, although eventually it will. So here's my one of my pilot railings that I had to do over because I just missed the bend too many times and it broke. So, you know, just trying some additional details. You know, model railroading is a great hobby, but it's also a wonderful learning process. So I've just spent some time on these lower quality, inexpensive models, learning how to do some things. So again, I will ultimately paint the railings, and this will ultimately probably get new Athearn power trucks. The gears on those, while not helical, they are a little thinner. The actual gear faces itself are about a third the width of the old style, so it's a little bit less friction. They seem to run a little bit nicer. My hobby shop had the rear truck, power truck available for some reason and not the front one. I'm not sure who bought one truck, but they've ordered the front one for me. So now when those come in, this will get power trucks. And I've already weathered the frames, but as everybody knows, those can just get swapped over to the other ones. I may even add brake pipes in between the cylinders just for additional detail. We've got the railings all painted. Naturally, I have to come back and weather those to match the rest of the locomotive, but one more step completed. It's interesting. Seems like the maybe I'm just not picking up on it, but it seems like I've seen photos where they went to different spots with the yellow warning ends of the railings. Actually, I've since found a photo of 5889 that the yellow went up to the first stanchion almost, so don't know if I'll come back and fix that or not. Like I said, I'll probably come back and weather these. Might even use some steel colored paint where people would most likely, you know, use the handrails, because a lot of times those were worn raw, particularly on an older locomotive. So additional details will follow. So anyone who's frustrated trying to model B&O or chassis with the flow quill paints no longer available, I've found that if you use Model Master Blue Angels Blue and Blue Angels Yellow, that comes close, but not quite. So in order to get the blue to work, you've got to take some flat black and mix that in. And in order to get the yellow to not to be such a bright yellow, I actually use International Orange. Just a dab of that will take the yellow from a really bright yellow and make it more of a little bit of a goldenrod that matches the B&O or chassis yellow. And then the International Orange is a pretty close approximation for the chassis color. So other projects related to the GP7, I'm going to work on doing another one of these, but just have a piece of brass tubing. On the newer locomotives that come with the LEDs, I've been putting resistors on those as I put decoders in them. On my older ones, I've been sticking with incandescents, so I just use a piece of brass tubing and then put a couple concentric pieces of shrink tubing around it. And I use a 16-volt grain of white light bulb. And so far, with 16 volts, obviously you're not getting that much. I think my system runs, my DCC system runs at about 13.6 volts. So by the time that comes out, the other side is DC voltage. It's probably nowhere near 16, obviously. So for 2 years, 2.5 years, or 2.25 years, I guess, I haven't lost a single headlight. I've actually had an LED die on a different locomotive, but haven't lost one of the incandescents yet. So I'm still torn as to which way I'm going to go in the long run. I do like the look of an incandescent light better. The yellow LEDs, golden yellows, I guess, those are better than the blue looking ones that they used to have, but so still a trade-off like most things. Also, I opted, looking online, I used to be able to get Masha McCann motors with a pre-molded lead weight from the same dealer. It seems like they keep selling different components to each other and lines and brands, and I just couldn't find them both at the same place. And then the lead weight, you know, was a $7 lead weight, and they wanted like 12 or 15 bucks to ship it. So I ended up going to Northwest Short Lines, and so far, I'll tell you, their can motors, they spent a lot of time, I think it looks, to identify a motor that would fit both narrow body and wide bodied shells. It's a very, very long motor. It seems to be a 5,000, it's marked as a 5,000 RPM, so I'm guessing at 12 volts it runs at 5,000, which is pretty slow, which is great. So I have yet to really run this to determine how much, how the performance is. But so far, everything about the product, the packaging, the instructions, very, very impressed with Northwest Short Lines. So I will, on a future video, once we get the decoder in this, in the future, we'll run this and I'll give you a little bit of feedback. So Northwest Short Lines suggests you use the existing Athearn motor mounts, which I thought I had out, must have put them away. And turn them around, reverse them 180 degrees, and then set the motor on that and trim them. I just wasn't satisfied with that, and as I had mentioned, I was looking to try and get a lead weight. So I had mentioned before I was casting the air tanks, so I already had some casting resin. So I got to thinking, wonder if I sealed up the compartment where the fuel tank is in here, and I used a lot of number 8 shot to weight all kinds of different things here. I bought a whole bag of this stuff about 2 years ago, and it probably lasts me forever. So I got to thinking, I wonder if I started to mixed up some casting resin, poured it in the void down here, and as I was filling it, threw some lead shot in there. So actually was able to get, you can see a couple pieces of lead shot just that were sitting on the bottom. So it created a nice flat, relatively flat, you have to sand it a little bit, or scrape it rather, because the casting resin gets a little bit of a meniscus on the edge, so you have to scrape that flat, but it gives you a nice stable platform. I actually put a piece of a non-magnetic weight underneath that, and then to finally adhere it used clear silicone, just a little bit of a bed between that, so there's no metal-to-metal contact, just to give the motor a little bit of cushion and flexibility so there's no vibration. But I was able to add about 0.6 of an ounce by doing that, and didn't quite get it sealed perfectly, so it seeped out near the air tanks and actually pulled the paint off of one of the air tanks, so I'll have to just repaint that, not a big deal. And I use the track whenever I repower locomotives. I always set it on a track just so you can try and get the drive shafts lined up as closely as possible. Trying to identify both directions, actually all 3 dimensions, to make sure you're lined up, because that does tend to reduce noise and clicking and all kinds of other stuff. So these Northwest Short Lines, you get these custom shafts. You have to get to the right length. So all in all, seems like a pretty good system. So we will see how we end up doing with that. But so far, it's looking good. Okay, here it is with the shell back on. So we are making progress. So what I will do is I will place an order for a TCS Wow Sound decoder, and probably while that comes in, or while I wait for that to come in, I will work on getting these headlights installed, usually with these wide body Athearn Blue Box. I put a oval speaker in, and that usually sits behind the rear truck. Interestingly enough, it looks like when they rebuilt the GP7s at B&O and C&O, that they reversed the control stands. So the GP9s that didn't get rebuilt, still ran long hood forward, it appears. At least I haven't done an exhaustive study, but some of the units look like the long hood was still forward. On 5889, although this side's weathered out, the other side I do have a picture on the internet that shows the F on the short hood. So it looks like when they rebuilt GP7s, they must have reversed the control stands, but the GP9s came from the factory. It's long hood forward, and you know, by 1974 they weren't rebuilding those, or it doesn't appear that they were. So this one will be short hood forward, because that appears to be how it was in the prototype. Additionally, I might put some brake pipes in between the two brake cylinders again while I'm waiting for the decoder to come in. So what I'll do is when that comes in, then we will get this thing programmed. We'll get its speed matched with the other locomotives, and maybe we'll use this 5889 for our first operating video, and I'll run a turn or a local freight, and we'll capture that on video. So thanks for watching. More to follow. Thanks.